Hello and welcome to another Mjolnir at the Movies intermission. Now, in this particular intermission, what I wanted to do was to go back to the film Rollerball, the proper film Rollerball from 1975, not that heap of shit that they made in the 2000s. And what I wanted to do was to look at the aesthetics of Rollerball. In other words, the art and interior decoration, but particularly the music and architecture of Rollerball, because I think that it's incredibly important in this film. If you notice, there are often long and languishing shots of architecture in this film, and of course music plays throughout, but the styles of music are very interesting because they often contrast the classical and the hyper modern, and we're going to come on to that. And I'm going to do it by using stills from the film, rather like James did in that particular one that he did on the film Matrix Reloaded, or one of the Matrix films anyway. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, let's have a look at this first picture. This is from right at the beginning, which is the opening shot of the film, which is the arena, of course, upon which Rollerball will be played. Now, of course, we don't know that at this point in time. All we've got is this shot of the arena in darkness, and of course the darkness prevents us from seeing what it really is and what it's used for, this interior. And it's a shot looking down, and there's sort of a cathedral-like quality to it, as I mentioned in the podcast we did on the film. So you have this sort of look at the central altar looking downwards. You have Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor playing in the background. And of course, the important thing to remember here is that only the viewer of the film can hear it. Only the viewer can hear this music, and this is important because if you notice throughout the film, all classical music in the film can only be heard by those outside of the film. So characters within the film cannot hear any of the classical music played. They can only hear the modernist music in the film, which is a synthesized version of jazz, really. Now, the classical music was arranged and selected, and the modernist and futuristic music was composed by Andrei Previn, who died a few weeks ago. He was a Jewish chap, of course. If you look into his private life and the shenanigans that went on with Woody Allen and the East Asian girl that Previn adopted, and Mia Farrow, and all the little sort of relationships that went on there, and some very dubious ones. You can see what kind of a mess Jews make of social situations. But anyway, and we'll get back to the film. That's a little of aside. So yeah, so you've got this sort of really solemn atmosphere, if you like, the stillness of the scene as well, all serves to give it this cathedral-like quality. It lulls the audience into expectations of serenity and reverence, something vaguely traditional. But then the word Rollerball suddenly breaks this, and you'll notice that Rollerball has this futuristic font of lettering. Why is it futuristic exactly? Because it has no precedence in traditional forms of writing style, and it comes on screen just as Bach hits its deepest note, and this creates this air of ominousness, of course, and you have this ominous nature towards the sport of Rollerball, in that it's a sport that is designed to break the will of the individual and to kill the individual, of course, after a period of time. Johnny E, the leading figure of this film, is unusual because he's actually got to the point where they want to retire him because he's become too successful. Now, as we go on into the scene, and of course this opening shot lasts a long time before people start to emerge from openings within the arena floor itself. And so you have this futuristic quality then suddenly appear in the film after this futuristic font comes onto the screen with the word Rollerball. But you still have this air of the cathedral quality kept, and because you still have, although you have a brief close-up of the people coming out of the floor, you then go back to this shot of the arena looking down, and the smallness of the people and the ritualistic atmosphere all adds to this cathedral-like quality. And also, of course, the smallness of the people looking down at them, it foreshadows again the theme of insignificance of the individual in this oligarchical society that has been created in the film. Now the lights then come on to slowly reveal more of a futuristic setting. So we're moving, of course, from the idea of this cathedral, like this traditional idea that we have at the beginning of the film, towards the futuristic idea. So it's changed our expectations of the film in the first couple of minutes or so. And we have this state-of-the-art stadium, and this stadium is the Rudi Sedlmayr Halle in Munich, or at least it was. It was originally the basketball hall it was created for the events for basketball at the 1972 Munich Olympics, just 3 years before the film was made. So the film was made in 1975, and this was state-of-the-art stuff at the time. And a lot of buildings in Munich were built at that time in the build-up to the Munich Olympics, to show Munich as this really cutting-edge city. And we'll come on to a few of those buildings because a lot of these architectural scenes were filmed in Munich. Now the construction, looking at it here from outside, is aluminium. It's an aluminium construction, and it's an odd mixture of styles in that it's part rotunda and part rectangular construction. And as I say, now it was named in 1975 after Rudi Sedlmayr, who was one of the organization committee for the 1972 Olympics in Munich. But in 2011 they changed the name to the Audi Dome. That's very interesting because just like the film, we've gone from the individual name to a corporate one. And so it's kind of art imitating life, really, isn't it? That later on, of course, we've got this scenario in which Audi have taken over the name of the individual and blotted the individual out of existence almost. Who now remembers Rudi Sedlmayr or whatever he did. Then, of course, we go straight from the now Audi Dome, or the Rollerball arena within the denouement of the film, and we go across the road. It's not really across the road, actually. This in the film is the the corporate buildings of the energy corporation. But this is actually the BMW headquarters, and in fact, if you look there at the orange circle, of course, is the symbol of the energy corporation. You know, because orange, of course, often symbolizes energy. But that is also to blot out the BMW logo, which sits there on the real building itself. In real life, the BMW headquarters do not sit outside of the Audi Dome. They're about 5 miles away, still within Munich, because of course Munich is the home of BMW, which I think is the Bayerische Motorwerk, if I remember rightly. It stands for, so Bavarian Motor Works. But anyway, these buildings, and we'll come on to the other building that's there in a little while, because there's also the BMW museum there, which is also used in the film. We'll come on to that in a moment. But they were all built, or designed rather, by Karl Schwanzer. Karl Schwanzer is interesting because he's built a lot of these extreme postmodernist buildings, and this is certainly one of them. And as I say, it was built precisely to be that, and built again. So it was built from 1968 to 1972, so that it was there in time for people to see it during the Olympics, and so to foreground Munich as this technologically futuristic city, which, I mean, it is a home of high technology. That is a fact. But what's interesting about the architect Karl Schwanzer is that he started off as a National Socialist architect, and he actually redesigned the ring in Zurich, or Sorau as it is in German, which is in Silesia. It's now in Poland. And it was interesting that when he designed it, he wanted to design it as the pure face of Germany, the pure face of the German spirit. So he's gone from being, you know, favoured by National Socialists to being this guy who's at the forefront of supposedly everything that the National Socialists didn't stand for. But of course that's not really true in architecture, because one of the ideas of National Socialist architecture was actually to make people feel small. It was to overpower people. It was again to make the individual seem less significant, and that the state was greater than the individual. And this is certainly the case. Why we have such architecture now, it is to make the individual look small. And you have this throughout the film, in that the architecture makes the individual look small. And so when you have Jonathan E. walk into these buildings, he looks small in the state of the buildings. And you also notice this long languishing shot of the symmetry of the towers of the headquarters themselves. And these buildings were actually designed as well to resemble motor parts, apparently, parts of the motor, especially the BMW museum, which we'll come on to now, I think. So this is the BMW museum. Now in the film, it's used as the headquarters for the people in charge of leisure. So those kind of functions, and it's where Jonathan E. first goes up to find out about history and what has happened and so on. And so he goes to the library there, and of course they can't offer him anything because the whole point of leisure in this particular society is not to think. Basically, not that people are denied the right to actually think for themselves, and of course you get that with Bartholomew, Mr. Bartholomew, who's always telling Jonathan E. not to think too much, and that he should just enjoy life. But of course, thinking is part of enjoyment. But there's nothing there for that, and the library provides no answers there. But when they come out of this building, which again is designed by this same architect, Karl Schwanzer, and it's again designed as part of a motor, I think it's the cam or something like that. Or no, it's a cylinder head, sorry. It's a cylinder head, yes. But when they come out of it, doesn't it look like a toilet? And I think that it's been deliberately photographed in this way and shot in this way, so that it looks like they're coming out of a toilet just at the same moment as Moon Pie is telling him that the corporation treats them well. And of course the corporation doesn't really treat them that well, because they're sending them out onto the rollerball arena to die. And they're constantly upping the ante to get more deaths onto the arena. And so this is seen as ironic. Now, if we look at some of the interiors, we'll start with the interior then of the Energy Corporation headquarters, which is, as I say, is really the BMW headquarters. And we look in there, it is a typical corporate interior, and everything is white and grey, except for, of course, for the orange, which is the colour of the Energy Corporation. We have the writing, of course, this futuristic writing which appears everywhere. And we have the word E, which is for energy. And I never thought about this during the podcast, but the E, of course, in Johnny E stands for energy. He is what the corporation has made him, essentially. And so he's a corporate man. He doesn't have a traditional surname or anything like that. He just has the E for the Energy Corporation. So now looking at other interiors, we're going to look at this facility for leisure. And here, of course, they walk in, and it's exactly the same sort of interior, this corporate interior, as the headquarters. And they go up into the escalator and onto the next floor, where you have yellow this time instead of orange, but it's the same sort of writing. The yellow is probably to sort of get away from this idea that it's controlled by the corporation, but in fact we find out that it is controlled by the corporation. But everything is extremely pristine, you'll notice. Everything is ordered. Everything is controlled, essentially. And this is the point of it all. That people often who are National Socialists or LARPers or whatever often say how ordered and how clean everything was in National Socialist Germany. Well, yes, because of the immense amount of control. Now, Coming back to a different kind of setting, if you like, which is Johnny E's own home, which is his ranch. Now, there is plenty of nature here, although there is plenty of nature everywhere, you'll notice. There's not this idea, this other dystopian idea that tends to come into films, that nature is pushed to one side and everything's made into concrete. Nature actually is there alongside these things, although of course they do destroy nature at this party when they fire upon these trees and so on. So there is a little sort of bit about nature there. But Johnny E, of course, he wants to live more among nature, among wild nature, as opposed to controlled and ordered nature. But even if you look at his ranch, the architecture of his ranch is postmodernist, because the idea is in this world that all architecture, or most of it at least, is postmodernist. We'll come back to a bit of architecture that isn't in a little while. But there, of course, he's landing in his helicopter, and then he goes inside. Now, the interior is a little different from the corporate world in that you have wood in there, real wood. And you'll notice that Jonathan E, he's dressing in beige, which is, you know, it's a little bit of rebellion, a slight bit of rebellion. It's not really brown, is it? A brown or a green of nature, or whatever. But it's an attempt. It's an attempt to live naturally, and so you have all this wood, which we assume is real wood. Actually, you have wood paneling, wooden beams and so on there, and posts. But equally you also have the chrome and the glass, the chromium, and plastic chairs and so on. So it's an attempt to get away from the corporate way of life. And you'll notice the art there. There's a bit of artwork which is the artwork of a horse, but again, there's no sense of history. The horse there is completely out of any kind of context that gives it history or tradition or meaning beyond the thing itself. And we'll come back to a bit of art as we go along. But I want to first look at this interior, at this little soiree that they have on Jonathan E's, or for his behalf, for his so-called retirement. And we have the house of Mr. Bartholomew, and it's very richly and lavishly decorated, of course, but again it's very corporate. You have these pillars there, these big they're sort of marble, but they look more mock marble actually, and all the furniture is postmodern. We go into his study, and we have these crystals. We know that he likes those crystals. He has them in his office as well, dangling down, of course, which Jonathan E cuts his hand on, which we've explored in the original podcast. But he has them there on his desk. Behind him he has postmodernist art. Now, looking at the piece of artwork on the left there, is that a postmodernist representation of the Leisure Building? It certainly looks like it. And so again, there's nothing beyond what is corporate. And there's certainly nothing traditional. There is nothing relative to history or to the time prior to the present age. Now, coming back to the idea of the library, and the information that Jonathan seeks. Of course, he goes to the library in Geneva. Now you have this this sweeping shot over the mountains and across the lake to the library, which is a neoclassical building, which is actually the Palais des Nations, the Palace of Nations, and was built in the, well, starting 1929 and built throughout the 1930s, originally to house the League of Nations. And it's now owned by the United Nations. Now, and that's particularly telling, isn't it, if you look at the film and the ideas in the film and the corporate ideas that are being institutionalized by the League of or the United Nations as they are now. But while this shot is going on, the shot over the mountains across Lake Geneva there to this building, we have Shostakovich's Symphony No. 5 being played in the background. It's a very triumphal symphony, this part of the symphony anyway, the Largo, and it establishes this idea that he's triumphed, that he's got there to this library. But then you get to the interior, and you get this this shot of the lift, and as you get the shot of the lift and you see that the numbers are those same futuristic corporate numbers, suddenly the piece of music changes in tone and you get a dissonance which you don't have in the original piece of music. You start to get dissonance within it, and then when the lift doors open and you see that the interior is the same sort of sterile interior that you've had throughout the film, you have this single flat note instead of the triumphal climax of the piece of music itself. And so I hope that I've shown a little bit about how moods are created within films here, because as I said, this film is far more than just a mindless bit of violence and a bit of sci-fi, and it completely contrasts with the remake or reboot or whatever you want to call it, which is just mindless nonsense. This film has certainly been thought about stylistically, and as I say, it really reflects this idea throughout the film of doing away with the past. So even at this last little scene where you have a building that, although it's not I mean, it's still from the modern period, so from, it's from the end of the 20s into the 1930s. You still have a bit of history to it, and you still have the old classical styles to it, but the interior has been ripped out and has been replaced with this corporate postmodernist interior, and of course this library is not a library at all. It's a place where there is no information, and zero is a computer that cannot give any answers. It's all been computerized, so it's of this future, but it's a dysfunctional future. And it's a future that, of course, we have to remember our present leaders want us to head towards. And this is why tradition is important. This is why getting back to our history, to learning our real history, is absolutely of paramount importance. So Nature is extremely important, but equally in the context of history and how we got to this point in time is extremely important, and not in a sense of the bullshit that things like the History Channel and the BBC push. So do your own research, read old books, is my message to you before we leave for this time. And soon there will be a new episode of Mjolnir at the movies up and ready, and the next episode will be on Videodrome and Existence. So I hope you will be back for that, and please subscribe and leave a like if you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have. Bye for now.